Welcome to a special edition of Crossing the Line with Greg Heym. But aren't they all special? Isn't that really the truth here? We have a very special guest. My good friend Martha Stark has come back for more. Thank you so much for being here. Martha is clinical professor at the Robert F. Wagner School for Public Service, and more importantly, and easier to say, former Commissioner of Finance for New York City. But most importantly, a very cool person who I'm proud to say I'm lucky enough to be friends with.
Yes, indeed.
Because knowing Martha is a privilege, because you can learn so much from her. It's great. So how are you doing today?
Just today in particular, I'm pretty good, actually. No complaints at all. Really amazing solar eclipse. I'm pretty good.
Now, you're a big hoops fan, as are most people. This time of year is special,
Yes,
right?
it is.
And sorry about your Nets not making the playoffs. We're all about the Knicks. Although they're going to get, there's no way they can beat Boston. I think we know that now. But, all right, so the women's championship game, I know you played ball in college. To me, the way I summed it up, it looked like a girls versus, a daughter-mother game because South Carolina has so much size. You almost felt bad. You look at the rebound disparity and everything. Look, it was shaping up to be a really good game in the beginning, and then...
I think kudos to Dawn Staley. She's amazing, just amazing, has always been amazing. I've loved watching her play. But they have a lot of depth. The fact that...
you go undefeated, you got a deep bench.
Well, also the Iowa team's bench didn't score any points the entire game. That's telling, so...
Well, they played a lot of minutes as starters, too.
Yes, absolutely. But it was a great game. It was just really fun to watch. And
now, maybe you know this. They play quarters in the women's game in college. In the men's game, they play. Is there a reason for that?
No, because the women's game also used to be halves, but for some reason they went to 4 quarters. I don't know.
You got to have a difference somewhere, I guess, between the.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Got higher ratings in the men's game.
Yes.
Although the men's game starts at like 9:30 at night.
Everyone was asleep.
Yeah, especially after UConn started trouncing.
And you're not a UConn fan.
As a St. John's grad, I'd rather. No. And, I have family that went to Villanova. They talk about Nova. I said, stop it. I don't want to hear it. Right. St. John's beat Villanova twice this year, by the way.
Is that the only
and
two wins? No, just
plus,
kidding.
we got screwed. We should have been in the NCAA tournament. I don't know if it's a hatred of Pitino, but St. John's played a tough schedule. Big East is a tough conference. They only took 3 teams, I think it was. Some people say it's like a creep thing, like scope creep, where it's like, all right, if we take St. John's, we got to take this team and this team. But, all right, so... I didn't ask you this first time, but I have your approval to ask you again.
Okay.
Now, you had an interesting start to your term as finance commissioner. Literally, your first day was a doozy, and you got to tell the story because it is funny. And this is something that was happening when I was at Rebney, and I actually met with the person that triggered all this stuff. But
so, I don't know. You have a interesting sense of humor if you thought it was funny, but...
well, because it wasn't involving me.
Yes,
that's
absolutely. So what happened my very first day at the Department of Finance is, well, actually, I knew a couple of days before, is they said, could you start your job early? And I thought, well, I suppose I could. And they said, okay, because we're actually going to have a big event happen, and they... did a pre-morning raid and actually arrested 18 assessors on bribery charges. Charges that said that, basically in exchange for money, they were agreeing to kind of lower assessments. And so my very first day in the office, I was with the U.S. Attorney doing press on property taxes, which I loved all along. So it was all kind of good for me from that perspective. But kind of more importantly, it actually gave us an opportunity to sort of figure out how we could try to be more transparent and clear about
and that was a huge
properties.
I complain about the DOF website, so do you about certain things that aren't there. But when I was at Rebney in the 90s, in particular, when you went online or you got a tax bill, it was basically like, here's your market value, here's your assessed value, pay this amount, and like,
shut up,
leave it at that. Yeah. Now there's so much more information, and and transparency, does solve other issues. But the interesting thing was the person involved was basically telling people they could lower their taxes before they came out. And you go, well, wait a minute, how do I know you're lowering them?
Right.
Like that was the interesting part. And we should have just come to the assumption that since he was a former assessor that he would have. But anyhow, it was funny. It's funny now. Maybe you can laugh about it now. I don't know.
It's I guess I think of it as like it was a great opportunity to seize this moment and kind of a little bit uncover how these things were done. And so for me, it was more about an agency that liked having things in a black box, convincing them that was really not the way, that there was a better
and everybody
way.
knew who the new finance commissioner was pretty quickly,
yes,
I bet.
Pretty soon on, absolutely.
Well, that is a great story. And so as you know, every week here, because you've been here before, always looking at the latest news in the economy and housing and other interesting things. And this is our 21st episode, Martha.
Wow.
Thank you, Ray.
21 years old. Excellent.
Well, it's funny. So every week now we try to come up with a song that has that number in the lyrics somewhere. And this one actually is in the title. It's called 21, and it's a song by the Eagles. And the first line is 21 as strong as I can be, and strong as I can be. That describes this, this show. I know what freedom means to me. They sometimes let me say what I want. And I can't give the reason why I should ever want to die. Well, let's say not I, the show would ever want to die. Right. But that's off the Desperado album, which has become my favorite Eagles album over time. I think it's a really good one. I mean, there's a million songs that say 21 in it. But today we're filming a little early. It's April 11th. And it's a bit of a dreary morning. Me and Martha having bad hair days. Yeah. Clearly, right? Because of the humidity and the rain has been awful. You always got to start with a joke. That's what they tell you. I've already had a couple of them. Hopefully one has been funny. Again, I'm Greg Heym, but you already knew that. Chief economist of Brown Harris Stevens and author of The Line, weekly economics and housing blog with a lot of subscribers. I won't brag and give the number 2,500, but again, love all the new listeners out there. Hope you like and subscribe all the great shows on the More Network. And we're here as always in beautiful Studio 1873 with great decor provided by our friends at the Everset. They do a great job I need all the help possible making me look good, so that's important. We have Ray and Lena. You can't clap for yourself, Ray. Woo-hoo. Even Lena's like, no, don't do that. You're embarrassing me. And always trying to be informative, concise, entertaining, edgy, all at the same time. Any questions, comments, CTL at bhsusa.com.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
.com. All right, so we're going to get to the one-line item, which is really the latest on inflation. It came out yesterday, and then today we got another one. It's the return of what I call the PI brothers, Consumer Price Index and Producer Price Index. And one was bad and one was good, but in this case, nobody pays attention to the one that was good. It's all about CPI, consumer prices, and they rose more than expected last month. As you saw, the markets did not like that at all because they're just thinking, we want rate cuts, we're going to hold our breath till we get rate cuts. Well, this is exactly what they didn't want to hear. Prices up 0.4% last month, 3.5% year over year, both higher than expected. If you look at core CPI, which strips out food and energy prices, which can move gasoline in particular has been on a wild up and down ride lately. That also rose 0.4% last month and is 3.8% higher than a year ago. Again, both those figures higher than expected. And then just because two measures of CPI aren't enough, we have this thing called Supercore, which the Fed really likes. So it's trying really to measure the services price index. So it strips out food and energy and aspects of housing and some other goods to really try to get a services thing. Knowing, too, that housing prices don't change quickly. It's a painfully slow, and the way that they do them, sometimes it takes several months for these changes to even show up in the data. So that level of inflation is up 4.8% over the past year, which is scary because these are things we have to buy. A lot of the things that have gone up are insurance. Home and auto insurance are ridiculously expensive now. healthcare always seems to go up, things like that. And over the last 3 months, super core inflation is running at an annual rate of 8%. That is scary. And with any kind of core inflation, again, we worry because it takes longer to come down, or as us economists call it, sticky inflation. Whereas gas prices can go up 6% in 1 month or down 6% in 1 month. So and the market was very scared, and it was a rough day yesterday, and we'll talk about what all that means in a minute. But then we had baby brother PPI that nobody really pays attention to, although it got a lot of heat last month because it kind of backed up the consumer price data. This time, it was a reverse. It came in lower than expected, producer prices, and eventually those get passed on to us, right, the consumers.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's not enough to negate the worse than expected CPI numbers. So here's the big takeaway. Inflation's come down big time over the last 2 years. It was running 9% annually in June of 22. So this shows you that it's come down, but it's flattened out the last couple months. We're not seeing any real improvement. And getting inflation down to that 2% goal is proving to be really hard for the Fed. I likened it to trying to score in the red zone in the NFL, right? Because it's tough to get in from the 20. Just ask the Jets. They can't do it. Last time we were good at red zone offense was when Plexico Burress was playing for us. And yes, that was after he accidentally shot himself. So, one of the reasons also this is very hard is the economy is doing much better than expected. The jobs report was insanely good for March, and that's not helping the Fed.
Right.
And what does all this mean? Don't expect rate cuts anytime soon. In fact, I will make a prediction.
Okay.
I make a lot of them.
I'm going to hold you to it.
No, we've tried to forget the ones that I don't get right. I will remind you of the ones that I'm correct on. I don't see the Fed cutting rates this year. I don't think so. At all. I mean, they said it was going to be 3. After the March jobs report last week, you'd be like, there's no way they're going to cut rates 3 times when we're adding 300,000 jobs a month. And now you see also more Fed officials and more economists saying, forget cuts. There could be a hike this year. Wow. If inflation stays like this and the economy keeps humming along, I think you could see a potential hike. But the important takeaway, since housing is what we're most about here, mortgage rates change every week or every day, and the Fed doesn't move the mortgage market the way a lot of people think it does. The Fed hasn't touched rates since July.
Wow.
And mortgage rates have gone up and down all throughout that time. So again, I know we all want rate cuts because we're told that's what we want. The stock market wants it, but that is no guarantee that mortgage rates go down. That's really about long-term inflation expectations, and this CPI report does not help that. So, it's hard, right, for all of us to deal with this inflation that has been going on for so long. How has it impacted your life, Martha?
I don't know. You're going to, I always want you to kind of educate. I want my students watching the line. And so, the
but you don't watch it when you're on.
Down. I never watch myself when I'm on anything. So don't take it personally. In any event, but I have my people. My people do it for me. I'm always sort of curious to think about, how to break this down for students so that they kind of understand it. And that's part of the reason why I love being on the show with you and having you talk about this stuff.
Well, you asked the tough questions.
So how's it affect my life? I feel a little kind of fortunate because I don't have to sort of think about like the stuff. So it's funny that you say this because my partner has a hybrid car and she's always telling me how little she spends on gas compared to my car, which is not a hybrid and actually needs like high octane, so stuff. And so she said to me, you know what? I had to pay more for my gas filling up my hybrid. And so I think, she thinks of it from that perspective.
But it's in every aspect of your life, right?
Right.
You go to the gas station, go to the supermarket.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Go to a restaurant, anything kind of like that. So it is, of course it has an impact. I just don't really feel like I think about it day in and day out, but
I think
it matters.
I think one of the problems is that you sometimes it comes out of nowhere. Like, oh, here's my auto insurance policies renewing. What? Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Or I live in Long Island. I just got new homeowners insurance. I had to go through 2 agents to do it.
Wow.
Because they don't want to insure homes anywhere near the water, even though I'm not in a flood zone.
Right.
Sandy didn't touch my house. It doesn't matter. Right. So many of the big names. So I think there's certain aspects, car prices have come down a little bit, but the rates are still high.
Right.
And the consumer's already weighed under over $1.1 trillion in credit card debt. Student loan debt seems to be going away by the minute. We hear this possibility of more of it being forgiven.
Yeah, forgiven.
Can I retroactively get my grad school tuition? My student loans? All right,
No.
Well, I'll get over it. But I think that at some point, even if you can afford to pay more for it, it's like, why? Why should a Happy Meal at a fast food place cost $16? Like, that used to feed a family.
Yeah, good point.
And then I realized I sound like my grandmother.
Is it $16?
Well, it depends on where you go, but some of I won't name names on film, but there are some that yes, it can amount to that. You don't realize it when they go, do you want to make that a medium or a large? And you go, yeah, why not? You don't realize.
Why not a large? And you realize it doesn't fit in your cup holder and, all that kind of stuff.
And then there's this idea of shrinkflation, right?
Right.
We talked about it. The Cookie Monster even tweeted about how his cookies were getting smaller, and that's not good. So, all right, well that's it for our line item. Before we get to the exciting reason Martha's here, she's got a little bit of gloating to do or celebrating to do. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, more celebrating.
Before we get to that, we have to take a break for this very important message.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business. And it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Okay. And we're back with the great Martha Stark. So, tax equity now in New York, or TENI. Are we allowed to call it TENI?
Yes, absolutely.
Since we're friends, I can
Yes.
use it. So, you were in the news lately, but before we get to that, why don't you tell us a little about the organization and how you got involved? I know everybody wants you involved in everything because you're Martha Stark, but how did you come to get associated with the group?
Yeah, it's really also a kind of interesting backstory. So several of us who are involved with the issue worked in the Bloomberg administration. And we used to, when I was finance commissioner, we kind of had this regular thing that we did weekly. On Sundays, we would look through the New York Times real estate section, and we would actually write each other an email that said something like, which of these properties has the best property tax deal? So the New York Times always listed a bunch of sort of sales, and then they would do it by borough and by property type, and we would literally kind of send notes to each other. We all kind of course, graduated from the Bloomberg administration, but we stayed in touch. We just would write kind of each other and thought to ourselves, well, nothing's going to happen with the property tax, even though we're kind of in this friendly way talking about, who really has the best deal. Also wanted to look at who had the worst deal. And it became kind of clear, and not something that I didn't know when I was at finance, that the city's property tax system is kind of fraught with all kinds of inequities. And we wanted to sort of figure out a way to kind of address those. Everyone sort of was turning to the legislature and saying, well, the legislature needs to fix it. The legislature at the state level, but we can't fix it unless the city tells us what they want us to do. But we thought there was a legal angle and that no one had been pursuing the legal angle. And so what we did was we kind of put together a coalition of people, homeowners, some condo owners, co-op owners,
Some prominent landlords
Queens,
too.
some
I
prominent
saw.
landlords as well on the residential rental side. Of course, the taxes on rental properties are quite high and leads to higher rent. And it's a very interesting thing. I always would hope that tenants and landlords would actually be aligned on this. We talk about in negotiation, are there any compatible issues? Well, they should be kind of compatible around not wanting their taxes to be so high, right?
And do they not? Do the tenants not realize it just gets passed through to them?
Well, I think it's funny. Many years ago, Greg, when I started doing this work back in the early 1990s, there was a great deputy mayor at the time in the Dinkins administration, Bill Lynch. And I remember when the finance commissioner then, Carol O'Clarican, and I went to talk to him about property taxes and the equity of it. He said, I don't know. I don't know if anything could happen because he said, and he was a big guy, and his daughter now actually works for the governor, which is really pretty cool. In any event, he said, there's no rumbling. He went like this, there's no rumbling. People aren't saying anything about the property tax. Folks don't know. And I think tenants don't know. When you say property taxes to any kind of tenant, I say sometimes to my students, oh, how much do you pay in property taxes? And they say none. And I think that certainly there's an effort that needs to be underway to educate people that if you're in a Manhattan rental property and paying even, say, market rate, 1/3 to 40% of that rent actually covers taxes. And so that's huge. If you're in, sort of some of the boroughs, it's 25 to 30%. It's a significant chunk of your rent. And people need to understand that, especially because it's not done in a way that's fair. Really important for people to kind of understand the role that the property tax sort of plays. So all of that to say, we've got a group of people together. Of course, I'm a lawyer, but we kind of had to hire some high-powered guns, and so Judge Lipman, who's affiliated with Latham and Watkins, and several sort of attorneys, and we came together and said, are there some claims that we can make from a legal perspective that could help push changes in the way property taxes are done? And that's kind of how we got together. And it's been an amazing 7-year ride.
That's but anytime you're going through different levels of courts, right? I guess it can take a very long time. Now,
I wouldn't even say it's just the different levels of court. The fact of the matter is, despite everybody knows that the property tax is unfair.
Right.
Interestingly, the city and state have been trying to dismiss our case. So we haven't even gotten to the merits of the lawsuit. This has all been around, you should not be allowed to go forward with this lawsuit. You did not state a cause of action, the legal kind of terminology. And the state and the city have fought that the entire way. The state, interestingly, saying things like, we have nothing to do with the property tax. Why are we in this case at all?
Even though it's the real property tax law of New York State.
Yeah,
that
but they're like,
all this.
We're not in it. Why do you bring us into this lawsuit?
Now maybe,
and that's been what's been happening.
Maybe
actually.
take a second, too, because I think maybe a lot of the listeners and viewers don't realize that, this whole mess is about 40 years old, as I understand it, and it was vetoed by the governor.
Yes, it was.
Initially. So, and you think of all the Band-Aids and whiteout and other things, erasers that have been put to this, adding like a co-op condo tax abatement that really wasn't justified. I may get in trouble for saying that,
yes,
but it's
you may.
true.
Yes, indeed.
Because of the crazy way they're valued,
Right.
they're undervalued, and all these protections that may be designed to benefit single-family homeowners, which are the bulk of homes that are owned in New York City, I believe, still.
It's getting close, actually.
But, and then realizing that the people that's really benefiting are the ones with the multi-million-dollar townhouses that have their caps on their assessment increases.
You may really get in trouble for saying that. But okay.
What are you going to do, fire me from this podcast? We're crossing the line. I got to do it sometime.
Tilting at windmills.
Luckily, we're not
absolutely.
live, so no one's going to come coming through the door like axing me now. They can always just delete the recording. But no, I think, like you said, taxes. I live in Nassau County, and I have no idea what's going on there. They had a similar problem where everybody knew, like, you can't use construction values from the
1934,
1930s.
yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing was happening. The minority communities were being taxed a higher effective tax rate. They claimed to have been working to fix it, and then they were phasing it in. And yes, my taxes went up big time. And but I think that any tax system should be transparent, like we said earlier, but it's also got to be somewhat understandable, right?
Yes, no question.
Because how do you explain to somebody why they're paying a higher effective tax rate than a much more expensive home?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, first of all, the property tax is incredibly important, right? It funds schools, it funds fire in the city, unlike in other places like Nassau County, where each school district kind of has a different
They got
system,
their own money,
their own sort of money. The city's money is probably done in one of the best ways possible. It's just, you pull all the property tax revenue into one sort of pot, and then you try to distribute it as fairly as possible to the school districts and the like. But, to me, the kind of key things, one is people need to understand the tax. Second, they need to actually feel like what I'm paying compared to my neighbor is fair and makes sense to them. And third, it needs to be simple. I mean, this. You're talking a lot as an economist about different issues. It's a fact of life that we hate math in the U.S. We just don't like it. And so the harder you make the calculations, I mean, it's, we're teasing Lena about drinking coffee over there. The harder you make it, the more likely it is that people need lots and lots and lots of coffee to follow you if they're actually willing to sort of stick with it even for that long.
We say the word
Lena
tax.
Yeah.
You say the word tax and people are like, oh, why don't you just mention economics while you're at it?
Right.
Here we are talking about both. But the fact that we can keep it interesting, yes, Ray's following it. He's in. No, I think that, yeah, and so there's been a lot of research done on this. You're not just saying it, assuming everybody's going to believe you. You always have to have a lot of research, and you've looked at the effective tax rates in different neighborhoods, and we've kind of teased what the findings are, but you want to elaborate a little more on what you found?
Well, just actually what as you did such a great job earlier of talking about the PI, siblings or, super core, all that.
Oh, no, it's
stuff.
super inflation
I
that's coming after me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, talking about things like even the effective tax rate, people are like, what the heck does that mean? Right. And so I just want to sort of say the following. So the way that
you shouldn't have to have an effective tax rate because your tax rate should be based on the real value of your home. And
absolutely. So just to kind of explain it just real simply, you and I have a $100,000 home. And what we're trying to sort of figure out is, do we, or at least are we liable for the same amount of taxes? And we should be. It's $100,000. We might not like it, but the property tax is based on the value of one's home. And the tricky part for me about it is the taxing jurisdiction, the city, the county. They're telling you what they think your property is worth. That's what they're doing. They're saying to you, Greg, I think your property is worth $100,000. Martha, I think yours is worth $100,000. We should be liable for the same tax. The city of New York's system's so complicated, they won't just assess us at $100,000. They assess us at a percent of value.
Fractional assessment.
And that percent is supposed to be equal.
Uniform.
That's right. Yeah. Uniform is what the court said. I'm very thrilled about that.
But the city can go, uniform, yeah. You're all being, apartments are all being assessed at this percent. Townhouses are all being
right. But ultimately, you've got to tie what the assessment is to what the value is, and you hope that the value is real. And then just to sort of explain effective tax rate, on top of that, there's a tax rate, and so the effective tax rate is taking the taxes that you would pay divided by the market value that the city sort of imposes. And so, yes, our data, when we looked at it, a couple things became very clear. Actually, there was an article today, I think in the New York Times, where someone made this argument about that property taxes shouldn't be relied on. They weren't talking about New York City, but just sort of generally, because they tend to do the following things. The higher the value of the property tends to be the lower the taxes as a percent of that value. That's a problem. Second, if you are in a neighborhood that doesn't have huge growth in property values, those properties tend to be lower income properties. There's some certainly evidence that Black and brown communities also kind of suffer under this problem. They tend to pay a much higher tax as a percent of their value than others. And so we wanted to sort of highlight those things and really get the court to say something about it.
Well, and so the decision that went your way was basically the decision to allow this suit to go forward.
Yes, except, yes, that is true. We're thrilled about it. I have to tell you, I don't know where I would have been if the court went the other way, but I will tell you that a bottle of tequila would have been involved. But so really completely thrilled.
Now we know we can get Martha as a gift for being on the show.
Absolutely. What I was going to say is that thrilled with the court's decision because they did a few things. The first thing, as you note, is they said the case can go forward. The intermediate court, the appellate division, had dismissed the case. Actually, the opinion was written by a person who went to NYU Law School with me. I haven't spoken to her since. Actually, I didn't speak to her before either. But she wrote the decision at the appellate level saying that the case should be dismissed and that this should be handled by the legislature. And what the Court of Appeals did, which many people or your listeners may not know, that the Court of Appeals is our highest court in New York, as opposed to other places where it would make sense that would be the intermediary court. The Court of Appeals said, one, the case should be allowed to go forward. That was incredibly important, that the case should be allowed to go forward. Two, they clarified the law in a couple of ways. The city had been saying, we cannot have uniform assessments because there's another part of the law that actually caps assessments, says assessments cannot increase more than 6% a year, 20%. And they said, we can't have uniform assessments with that other law, and that other law was paramount. And the court basically said no, that you can have uniformity and respect the caps, and that's what had to happen. And the way, unfortunately, in a system with assessments at a percent of value, it means you have to lower the assessment ratio, and that you should be doing that. The second thing that they did was they clarified the law regarding co-ops and condos. So they said, for example, the city, again, had been arguing that co-ops and condos built prior to 1974 needed to be valued using rent-regulated properties. Completely crazy kind of sort of thing. So it led to places on Central Park West, Fifth Avenue, older kind of co-op buildings paying substantially less in taxes compared to their value than homes. And so the court clarified the law sort of regarding that. And finally, the last thing is we had made some claims under the Fair Housing Act that actually the property tax system could possibly perpetuate segregation. And the court said that our pleadings, what we said, was sufficient enough for us to be able to pursue the Fair Housing Act claims. All like kind of a trifecta, if you will, for us in terms of...
you should probably still drink that bottle of tequila, but only for different reasons
yes,
now.
Exactly.
So how long is this path going to take? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, great question. I don't really have a little ball, but there's a couple things that I would say. One, the clarity that the court provided about the law means that there are things that the city of New York can do now that would actually implement what the court's decision was. They can, for the homeowner class, 1, 2, and 3 family homes, they can lower the assessment ratio so that there really is uniformity. That's something that they can do. The second thing that they can do is take a look at how they value co-ops and condos, which properties they actually use rent-regulated properties for, and they can actually adjust the sort of co-op and condo assessments. The other thing that they can do is actually allow us to move forward with pleading out the Fair Housing Act claim. So there are things the city can do right now. Don't know if they're going to do those things, but they absolutely could do those today. And, the argument that we're going to make to them is that they really should do the things that the court has essentially instructed.
But aren't they going to say something like, do you read the papers? You see we got a lot of things going on here. Although the budget seems to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But they rely on this property tax. So, it's their biggest source of tax revenue by far.
So I think, in all of my sort of previous even conversations with you, I believe that you have to divorce how much money you want from the property tax from the base structure of the property tax. It needs to be as fair as possible. Okay. And so I'm talking really, and I do believe there should be a divorce. I'm talking about people feeling like the structure upon which this tax is built is not rickety. And for many, many years, we've said this is a structure that, the earthquake would have knocked over. It's so rickety, it's so broken. And so we can fix the assessment side of it, and how much money the city decides they want or need is a completely separate conversation. But you shouldn't raise a whole bunch of money on a structure that's not sound.
So there is an advisory commission on property tax reform, and a lot of my brokers, the company's brokers and brokers in the industry when I speak, are hearing about that, and they're hearing about this, and they always say, are they the same thing? How are they different? So you're familiar with a lot of the recommendations of this commission. Some of them seem that they may be things you like treating all residential properties similarly when you value them. But maybe if you go into a little bit about the difference, maybe what you'd like the tenant would like to see versus this commission.
Yeah, it's a great question. The commission issued its report after a long period of time. Also, COVID got involved, and Mayor de Blasio basically kind of released it in the last week.
It was like
of
his last day.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I think it was the last week of his administration. What I will say that's different between what we accomplished at Tenney versus what the commission report calls for. The commission report, every recommendation requires state legislation, every single thing. Our court case actually stayed within existing law, and so we don't need state legislation. What's very clear is the city can take action now to improve the current property tax structure. So that's a major difference to me. The state legislature is not, they've got a lot going on, as you said, and so getting them, I'm yet to see a piece of legislation written after the commission report was done, and it all requires the state to sort of act. The other thing that I will say is we were talking a little bit earlier about the tax burden on owners of rental properties and therefore their tenants. Nothing in the commission recommendations address that serious inequity. It dealt with a lot of other things, but it did not at all offer any possibility of a fairer tax system so that the taxes on rental properties make more sense and aren't causing a sort of undue burden on tenants.
Well, it's funny because we haven't heard much about the commission since outside of scaring people, because a lot of those changes would have serious consequences, like, for example, getting rid of the assessment increase caps on 1 to 3 family homes, or getting rid of the co-op condo abatement and replacing it with a sort of a homestead exemption or something like that, are frightening people, and using sales prices to value everything. I mean, a lot of this stuff has been talked about. This isn't the first go-round, right, for trying to change the system.
Right, but it's people are complex. All of us are very complex, right?
I'm told I'm fairly simple.
We're not going to go there.
Right now, my wife's going, yes,
very simple. On the one hand, right? I think we're a place that feels like there's lots of needs, right? We want great schools. You know, we want police and fire folks. We want firefighters who can be responsive. We want police officers who can, you know, really treat folks with courtesy, you know, professionalism and respect, but keep us sort of safe. And yet we don't want to really pay for those things. And I always find it sort of, I'm kind of a tax person. I want to pay for these things, right? And I want to do it in a way that's really fair. So I think that, the brokers, yes, they're concerned, but you can't. I find it hard to simultaneously say this tax is messed up and we don't want to pay it at all. I think it needs to be fair. And what constitutes fairness, we can have a discussion about, right? Maybe the property tax is inherently unfair, and so people hate it for that reason. But I think fundamentally, there's some things that we can all agree. If we're going to have a property tax, it should be based on something that we understand, and value is something that we understand. And people with a similar or same value should be liable for the same tax. If after the fact you want to provide benefits like, Martha, you're almost at that senior citizen age. We're glad you're staying in New York. We want you to stay. Or even if you wanted to, someone wrote me recently and said, I've lived here. I've watched this neighborhood change and invested in it. You want to do a longevity tax. I'm cool with that. But the base of that tax should be fundamentally connected to what the value of your property is. And we don't have that in New York.
Well, this happens because I reach out to you when my brokers ask difficult questions like, there are two townhouses of the same size connected to each other that have vastly different billable assessed values. And sometimes that's easy to explain, and sometimes it's not. It starts with the market value. What's the first step in there, and then everything that follows after it. But, the more things you add on top of a messed up system, for lack of a better term, although I think it's a pretty accurate description, you really, it's the co-op condo abatement. When you look at the way that these buildings are taxed, many of the co-ops, as if they were rent-regulated, rental buildings, is hard for people to understand.
It's interesting too because if anything, I think yes, this idea that co-ops and condos should be taxed as rentals emerged because this law was put in place in the early 1980s when there were not very many co-ops and condos, and yet New York City has a very low ownership rate. And so they wanted to sort of encourage people to own, and they thought, wow, well, they're not building a whole lot of 1, 2, 3 family homes, but maybe people could own their apartment. That combined with the sort of 1986 tax law changes led to kind of a higher
conversion mania to co-ops. Yeah.
And so the what was interesting for us with our court case is we didn't take on is the section of the law that requires co-op and condo owners to be valued as rentals. We didn't challenge that. We
just wanted uniformity.
We wanted sort of uniformity in treatment, but also tax laws only need to be rationally related to some government purpose. And it's easy to say 581's rationally related to wanting to increase kind of home ownership, right? That was the original sort of gist of it. So I think that, we're staying within the confines of 581 and wanted the court to give guidance to the city and say, you don't have to use regulated apartments. So, if I own a co-op, right, in Brooklyn, its taxes are probably going to go up as a result of this work that I've been doing. But what's interesting is...
That's your reward for doing
absolutely.
this.
But what's interesting about it is asking the question of, if I were to rent my apartment, how much would I rent it for? Well, I want to cover my mortgage and I want to cover my maintenance. That's a minimum, right? And I might want to make a little bit of money on it. But even if you were to use rents like that, it would make more sense to people. And currently, the system doesn't.
Well, it's funny, we talk about Consumer Price Index. They track housing using owner's equivalent rent.
Right.
But the logic there makes a lot more sense because that's your actual cost of ownership. If I buy a house that for $300,000, it's worth $600,000. My cost isn't $600,000. It's based on the $300,000.
Right.
Well, It's been great having you.
Well,
We could do this forever, but then no one would watch it because it would be too long. So hopefully people found it interesting enough and jump around. And we love to have you on because you really can explain things. I mean, property taxes, people are going to go, wow, I just watched a 45-minute podcast on property. What's wrong with me? Nothing. Martha explains it so well. And we've taught together for years now and fought really stupid taxes in the past.
Yes, we have.
Probably will in the future.
There'll be some more.
But it's always great having you and seeing you. And thanks so much for being with us today. And thanks to our audience out there for your continued support. It means a lot to us here at Crossing the Line. And we hope to see you or you hear us next week. I got to figure out how to say that better. I hope you join us next week.
Join us
when we
next
cross
week.
yet another line.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.